So I gave this short talk about maintaining positive emotion and faith, which really was triggered by being at the School of Oriental and African Studies back in the autumn. And it's an afternoon on green Dharma. It's basically Buddhist responses or possible responses to climate change. And for me, the most interesting speaker was a scientist called John Stanley, a scientist and a practicing Buddhist. And back in 2006, he'd edited, I think, a very important collection of essays called A Buddhist Response to the Climate Emergency, essays by famous and Buddhists and teachers from around the world. His talk I found very, very striking because he spent the first 10 minutes or so giving a very succinct and I found very scary summary of the latest climate science, and then proceeded to spend the next 50 minutes, almost all the talk, talking about how to develop positive emotion. And it really struck me that's very important. It's very true. Basically, without positive emotion, we tend to freeze. Buddhist response, trying to respond to ecological crisis or political crisis in the world, it can all seem so overwhelming. The danger is that we freeze and we don't actually turn to look at it. We don't end up doing as much as we could do about the situation. So my talk was really about initially going into the kinds of views that we hold, probably, the kinds of stories that we probably entertain, perhaps unconsciously, about the present and the future, which probably, when we kind of pull them out and look at them, don't necessarily stand up to scrutiny that well. I mean, if you think about it really carefully, I think it's also complex. The future is so complex, the present so complex. Humanity itself, as a species, I think we're in a new situation as a species. So never before have we been threatening the living systems of the earth so much, and yet knowing ourselves to be doing so. So I think in a new situation, it means we don't know what potentials we've got. I think we don't really know ourselves because we're in a new situation. And also, looking back through history, there have been all kinds of things which happened which had seemed completely impossible before they happened, so including positive things. Things like votes for women, the success of the civil rights movement in the USA in the 60s. So I think that there can be these kind of tipping points or paradigm shifts, where what had seemed completely outside the mainstream becomes mainstream. And also looking at the future, I mean, future scenarios about the future. Perhaps our scenarios tend to be a bit simple. The future won't be simple; it will be very complex. It will also be impermanent, of course. Lots of things happening all at the same time. Lots of good things and bad things will be happening all at the same time. There won't be a final victory or final defeat, I think. But I think our unconscious imaginations tend to think in terms of like Hollywood disaster movies that don't end, that kind of apocalyptic scenario or dystopian scenario, or perhaps a sort of Hollywood film with a happy ending, which is like this sort of way of thinking that or sort of assuming that things will just kind of work out okay somehow, like a Hollywood movie with a happy ending. But so I think cultivating a sense of not knowing the future, that can actually be liberating. I think that we can actually get a sense of agency from that. I think the future is actually much more up for grabs than we tend to think. So basically I was kind of recommending that we can become more aware of our stories and let the untrue or unhelpful ones go. We can also, at the same time, we can find out about the world if we want to, but we can also guard the gates of our senses, because we're just flesh and blood human beings. We need to be sort of looking after ourselves whilst we find out about stuff. And there's lots of traditional ways that we can cultivate positive emotions. There's gratitude practice, is really profound practice, I think. There's insight meditation, actually. There's meditation for developing loving kindness. The faith practices. And I think faith is particularly valuable in this kind of area of turning to face the world's problems as a Buddhist. And by faith I do mean Sangharakshita's wonderful definition of the ultimate in us responding to what's ultimate in the universe, or putting it another way, our heart response to our ideals of love and compassion. I think this gives us a really profound and powerful energy which we can really draw on. And in the talk I was pointing out that in Buddhism, Buddhist practice, insight, which takes us close to the way things really are, and faith and positive emotion tend to arise together. They tend to almost like affect each other in a similar sort of direction. They take us closer towards reality, but also in this state of faith and insight, we see the world very differently to how, especially we see the world very differently to how a neoliberal dominated media would have us see the world. I think the neoliberal dominated media, in the UK at least, and the USA, tends to want us to see a world, think of a world which can't change. It is a certain way, a certain economic reality, austerity, and so on. So I think that from a Buddhist point of view, it's a profoundly different view of the human world, if you like. I think from a Buddhist point of view, what defines human beings is our potential for enlightenment, and that's what's really important about human beings, not our greed, hatred and delusion. So I finished the talk by just pointing out there's lots of positive developments in the world, and that when one reflects on those, it has quite a profound, strong effect on us. And we can support those developments in lots of ways if we want to. My talks seem to touch people. It's very lovely to see there seems to be a lot of very positive energy in the room. But in discussion it seemed to me that people might be wanting more ideas about how to actually cultivate and develop positive emotion in daily life, how the actual nuts and bolts of doing that. So maybe there might be a sort of possibly a follow-up workshopy type thing in the pipeline. But yeah, it's a great privilege and a great pleasure to be at the LBC to do that workshop and give that short talk. Yeah, thank you.